everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Alright, so yesterday we were talking about the progressive era. Today we're going to talk more about the large changes that the progressive era is going to bring out that is going to fundamentally change America foundationally. So before giving you any precursor, let's just get into it. Make myself smaller here. Beep, 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 beep. I keep saying precursors this unit. Just is. Alright, so progressive legislation. These are basically laws that get passed and changes to the way we do things that are progressive. Means it's change, it's better for the average person. There's three main levels that these changes are going to take place at: the city level, the state level, and then the federal level. And all these things still impact today. So all these things are going to change right around the turn of the century, right around 1900, the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century. These changes are going to take place in that time period, and we still have them today. So more of what might be interesting to you is the way things used to be done, because they're going to change today. We're going to talk about things that change of how they're done today. So at the city level, it's kind of a unique situation here with the cities. So cities weren't originally able to tax however they wanted to, because different cities have different taxes today. Like New York City is going to have higher taxes than Mocksville, North Carolina is going to have as high taxes because they don't provide as much stuff. All right. That seems logical, that depending on where you live and how much stuff your city is providing you, your taxes would change. Well, it used to be that the states could mandate that all the cities have the same taxes, because the idea is all the cities have the same taxes. It's fair. Well, that's a problem because Galveston, Texas is the perfect example of this. You can have examples in every state and every city in America, but this is the defining one. So Galveston, Texas gets hit with a hurricane in 1906, absolutely devastated. All right, I'll show you a map where Galveston, Texas is. This is where Galveston, Texas is. It's right on the coast. This is the Gulf of Mexico. They get hit with hurricanes all the time, and this is the destruction that's left behind. However, they don't have the money to rebuild all this because they haven't been able to tax their people to have enough money to rebuild when they get hit with hurricanes. Because Galveston, Texas has to have the same taxes as like San Antonio here or Dallas, places that are far away from the coast that aren't going to get hit with hurricanes. So it makes it unfair for places like Galveston, who need to have higher taxes so that they can rebuild after a hurricane and they can help people out. This is really going to be the big change here at the city level, is that cities after this time period, thanks to progressive legislation, are going to be able to have home rule, which means they can tax themselves based on their needs. So present day, if you live at the coast, your taxes are going to be high because there's a chance you get hit with a hurricane and the city has to have that money to be able to rebuild. All right, so taxes are higher in the coast. If you're at a place that doesn't have a lot of natural disasters, taxes aren't going to be as high. That is actually something that came out with the progressive era, allowing cities the ability to create their own taxes. The fear was that cities would get really corrupt and just like jack up prices and taxes. That hasn't really happened, because if a city just unfairly raises taxes, people are just going to move out of the city, and then they don't get any money. So the free market and taxes are two things that seem to be pretty opposite. But in this situation, it does keep taxes fair, even if cities are allowed to create their own taxes. So home rule, that is what the cities wanted. At the state level, there's a whole bunch of different changes. All right. So there is direct primaries. Now that seems boring, and let's be honest, it's not super exciting, but it is really, really important in American society. So what a primary is say you have a governor. There's an opening for the governor. People have always been able to vote for the governor in their state. All right. So the people being able to vote, that's called a direct vote. Well, what was happening is who gets to run for governor? It used to be, the way the states were designed, is that the state picks two candidates and then the people vote between those two. The people have no say-so over who gets to run. All right? So if you get like a turd and then like a turd sandwich and that's your two options, nobody wants that. So they created the direct primaries, which means direct means people vote. Like that's what direct means. Whenever you hear about elections or anything, you see the word direct, it means the people are voting for it. Direct primaries mean that the people get to choose who runs for like governor and stuff. This really gives the people more power to decide who is going to be the ones that rule them. Two other laws that come out at the time is this idea of an initiative and a referendum. So, and this is a good cartoon right here. This is big old initiative and referendum talking trash to a state legislature. If a initiative means that the people can propose a law. Because the way it used to be, the only way a law exists is if somebody in the state government's like, hey, let's do this and let's vote on this, all right? However, if nobody in the state legislature decides to vote on something or presents a law to be voted on, it doesn't exist. So if everybody outside wants there to be a stop sign at the end of Elm Street, but the state legislature refuses to talk about it, there's nothing you can do about it, all right? Until the initiative comes out. Then the people can show up with enough signatures and say, here, we want a stop sign at the end of Elm Street. Here you go, Congress. At the state level, we want you to vote on this. And then those legislators' names are officially tied to how they voted, and they can't just ignore controversial issues, because that's what was happening with without the initiative. If it was controversial and there wasn't like a clear cut, like, which way do I go on this, they would just not talk about it so they don't lose re-election, so they're not associated with a controversy. And the people were like, oh, no, you're there to serve us. So the initiative allows the population to introduce laws that the legislators have to vote on and discuss. And then a referendum. Say this guy passes, there should be a stop sign every 10 feet on Elm Street or something, something nobody likes. If the state passes a law that everybody in the state hates, they can basically overturn it, basically veto that law, called a referendum. That is very rare to do. But just the fact that there is an initiative and a referendum, and these are weapons that the voters have in every state, it really keeps the legislature honest, because they know they can't just ignore stuff or the voters will do it for them. They know they can't pass bullcrap laws or the voters will vote it out. So because of these weapons are there, and they're not used a whole bunch, but the fact that they are there really motivates legislatures to be very aware of what the people want and what they won't tolerate. And then a recall. This is kind of a hammer. So if somebody gets in office and they're just garbage, all right, you're like, all right, well, I'm going to wait 4 years and vote them out. There's actually a weapon the voters have called the recall, where you can vote somebody out before the end of their term at the state level. That doesn't work for the presidency the same way. But for like a governor, that if they're really, really bad at their job, you can have an election just to vote them out before their term is up. This way, if you accidentally pick somebody that's absolutely awful in office, you can get rid of them. So a recall is the ability to like get rid of a governor. And again, all this is on the state level. This is a cool little map here of how often somebody gets recalled. So you can see here, it doesn't happen often. Usually it's state legislatures. A governor here with the green is actually very rare because it's only happened a few times. But it does happen. And so these are the amount of times. And so here recently it's been more common with the advent of the internet and stuff like that. And you can figure out pretty quickly, hey, this guy isn't doing what he needs to do. It's more common now. Probably the most famous one that has happened, or at least to me, famous is subjective, is one that happened in 2003 in California. California elected a guy named Gray Davis. He gets into office. Apparently, he doesn't understand money, and he just spends all their money and like starts like then telling everybody it's their fault because they're out of money. And it got weird in 2003 enough that the Californians, only 11 months, this guy hadn't even been in office a year, they recalled him and kicked him out. Now, they have to have like an immediate election in order to pick somebody else to be the governor. Well, it's California. There's a lot of famous people, a lot of star power, and having name recognition is a very, very important thing in politics. Do you know who won the governor in California in 2003? Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was, I'm old. He's an action movie star. He was a professional bodybuilder, Mr. Olympus. He was like the gold medalist of bodybuilders. If you don't know anything about bodybuilders, he's still the standard for bodybuilding today. From when he was younger. And then he became an action movie star. He's in like Terminator and Predator and all. He's been in a gazillion movies. And he's like, I'm going to be the governor. And name recognition, everybody knew him. They elected him. Here's what's crazy if you follow politics at all. California is almost all Democrats. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is a Republican. They elected a Republican, which goes to show how powerful name recognition is. And then shocks everybody. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a pretty good governor. And everybody joked about him being the governor. But Arnold Schwarzenegger was a very good governor. He was very well liked in California as a Republican in an basically all Democrat state. So he had to be doing something right. Arnold Schwarzenegger easily could have run for president and most likely would have won, but he legally can't. If you think that far ahead, like why did he stop being the governor and never be president? Because he was born in Austria, even though he spent almost all of his adult life in America. He was born in Austria, and that is one of the very few requirements you have to be the president of the United States, is to be born here. You have to be born here, you have to have been here for 10 years, so if you're born here and you move somewhere else and you come back, you had to have been back for 10 years, and you had to be 35. That's it. That's the requirements, and he doesn't meet the one where he was born here, so he legally can't be the president. But this is Gray Davis right here, who was recalled, and this is the newspaper at the time that Arnold Schwarzenegger became the new governor of California with the recall, which is something that was created to kick out bad leaders at the state level in the progressive era. All right, at the federal level, so social welfare programs, basically stuff like the FDA and managing the meatpacking industry, stuff like that's going to come out. Railroad regulation, and we're going to spend a good bit talking about that in the future in the next unit. Antitrust activism. So we're going to talk about the Sherman Antitrust Act here in a little bit. All right. The biggest thing, other than the fact that there is a Women and Children's Cabinet Department because of that focus we talked about yesterday with Florence Kelley and Mother Jones and those women in the women movement in the progressive era, there are some amendments. So you got the child woman labor, Florence Kelley, a lot of the social welfare at the time. They start doing some conservation. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to come out in the progressive era. The most long-lasting, impressive, significant ones, not that none of these are significant, are the amendments. Changes to the Constitution. There are 3 that come out in the progressive era. Now, the 16th Amendment might be the most boring amendment for students to learn about in the United States history. However, it is probably the most important one in your life. It is one that's going to affect you the most. The 16th Amendment creates the progressive income tax. What that means, the more money you make, the higher you are taxed. Because what was happening is when everybody was taxed the same and then the government would create like a tariff. Well, if it's a $1 tariff when you go buy groceries, somebody that makes, $1 million a year, that doesn't hurt them. But somebody who makes $10,000 a year, it's a real struggle. So tariffs were negatively affecting the poor people. So they created the progressive income tax so they didn't have to use tariffs as much. What this says is the more money you make, the higher percentage in taxes you pay. Now, this is like the most, it's very simple and it makes cool math. People don't quite understand how this works, and it's frustrating, and I have this, the adults get frustrated by this. So somebody that makes $400,000, all right, if you make more than $400,000, you pay more in taxes than if you made less than $400,000. Just using that as an example, all right? That doesn't mean that if you make $399,000 and you pay less taxes, that you actually bring home more money than somebody that made $401,000 who gets taxed at a higher bracket. The way progressive income taxes work, use 400,000 as the number here. Everybody gets taxed the same up to $400,000. The same. Once you start making money over $400,000, that new money gets taxed at a higher rate. So that first $400,000 doesn't get taxed any more than anybody else. So, like, basically, it's like your first $20,000 a year, if you have a house and you're an adult, your first $20,000 a year gets hardly taxed at all. So whether or not you make $1 billion a year or $18,000 a year, that first $20,000 doesn't really get taxed very heavily by the federal government at all. The more money you make, that money gets taxed higher. So it gets complicated and complex, but it is as fair as they can make it. And the 16th Amendment is designed to help out poor people with the taxes because the tariffs were just devastating for the poor people. So it basically allowed a more fair way of the government to tax everybody equally as much as they could. And then Mr. Wagstaff's a liar, probably the most boring one. 16th and 17th, they're close. So the 17th Amendment is important because the Senate, the federal government, there's the Senate, there's 100 people there, 2 people from each state, extremely important in the Senate. Well, it used to be who represents your state is, yes, it's 2 people, but it's 2 people picked by the state government. In the Constitution, it doesn't say that the people can vote for your senators that represent you in Congress. You vote for people in the House of Representatives, but not in the Senate. The 17th Amendment says that's ridiculous. So the 17th Amendment says direct means the people vote for the senators. So, like when there's a presidential election, you will also vote for who do you want to represent the state in the federal government. So they created the direct election of senators. Now, one of the most controversial amendments that we pass is the 3rd Amendment that gets passed here, is the 18th Amendment, which makes alcohol illegal. The progressive movement was a big pusher of the temperance movement, the idea that alcohol does nothing but causes negativity in society. They had attempted this in Maine, and they made alcohol illegal in Maine, and all of Maine's alcohol-related problems went away. So they thought, hey, if we just make it illegal in the whole country, there will be no more alcohol problems. And there was domestic abuse, alcoholism, all types of stuff, negative outcomes of alcohol. However, the reason it worked in Maine, and they'll figure this out later, is because once you made it illegal in Maine, everybody in Maine that wanted to drink alcohol just moved to a different state to drink alcohol. When they made it illegal everywhere, there's nowhere people to move to, and almost instantly, everybody starts breaking the law by making their own alcohol and selling it. And the 18th Amendment, which makes alcohol illegal, almost instantaneously becomes unpopular. And they're like, this is awful. So for like 20 years in American history, alcohol was illegal. It's not going to be until the 1930s, and we will get there eventually. They end up passing the amendment, the 21st Amendment, to make alcohol legal again. So, I guess the way you can remember that, like when you're 18, like, yay, I'm an adult, but alcohol is still illegal to me. All right. So the 18th Amendment, alcohol is illegal. That's how you remember that one. And then when you're 21, when you turn 21 years old, alcohol becomes legal, and you can associate that with the 21st Amendment. That's a pure coincidence that those numbers line up like that, but it is a way to remember that alcohol was made illegal at the 18th and then made legal again with the 21st. All right. Changing gears here, unions. So progressive era is this big focus on unions. Well, the federal government is very much manipulated by these big corporations, by monopolies at the time. They're also called trust. For this course, trust and monopoly, pretty much interchangeable terms, all right, for this course. So the Senate, the federal government, is basically controlled by these monopolies, right, who have a whole bunch of say-so over these senators. They fund their campaigns and stuff. So while all these great things are going on about elections and all that, when it actually came down to workers being treated better, nothing was really getting done. So the workers are going to start taking it into their own hands, and they're going to start creating something called unions. So a union, and this is a little cartoon that symbolizes it, is the idea that all the workers get together and fight as one cohesive group. So the weapon that unions are going to have is the ability to go on strike. So if you work in a factory with 2,000 people and Billy shows up one day and he says, I'm not going to work anymore until you pay me more because you're paying me like nothing. I want more money. Guess what's going to happen to Billy? They're going to fire him. And they ain't going to think twice about it. 10 people might show up and be like, we're not going to work till we get paid more. Fire all 10 of them. Guess who's outside? 10 immigrants willing to come in and do that job for the price they were doing it for. All right? So individually, you don't really have any power. But if all 2,000 workers get together and say, we're not going to work until we're paid more, well, there ain't 2,000 immigrants outside that you can hire right then. And so you have a strength in numbers. So unions start growing where all the workers all get together and fight as a collective, cohesive group for the benefit of everybody. Right? So it's like a strength in numbers situation. Owners hate unions with a passion because unions do nothing but demand better working conditions and higher wages. Stuff that costs the owners money, stuff that costs the owners in their profit margin. So owners hate unions, workers like unions. Generally speaking, that's how it works out. Here's the main unions at the time. All right. The most famous one in the late 1800s was the Knights of Labor. Basically, if you're in a union in the mid to late 1800s, after the Civil War up until about 1883, if you're in a union, you're going to be in the Knights of Labor. This is a photograph of the Knights of Labor protesting working conditions at a factory. So the Knights of Labor were really popular. But then there is a situation that happens. In Chicago, the Haymarket factory, the McCormick Reaper Works factory turned into the Haymarket area. Basically, the Knights of Labor, who are like countrywide, right? They have like little areas all over the country. They are having a protest and a strike that turns violent in Chicago. And this is a drawing of it. That somebody at this protest throws a bomb or a grenade in the middle of a bunch of police officers. It kills a bunch of the police officers, kills some other people there. They end up arresting like 5 guys that they think did it and executed them, but they don't have really any evidence. After this happens, labor unions become really unpopular because they're viewed as violent and extremist. So much so that the Knights of Labor basically, poof, ceased to exist. Well, when that union dissipates and no longer exists, there's a huge panic. You have to have a union. Like, that was the only way that people were getting changed because the government wasn't doing it. All right. These monopolies were controlling the government. So the only way of doing it was having unions. So once the Knights of Labor, who let men, women, skilled workers, the Knights of Labor let everybody in it. All right. Once the Knights of Labor disappears, everybody starts desperately looking for a union to take over. All right, so the Knights of Labor, Terrence Powderly, I doubt you're ever going to have to know his name, but if you ever see Terrence Powderly, he's the guy that was in the Knights of Labor, but it kind of loses his power when the Haymarket Square riot takes place and somebody throws a bomb. All right, so almost immediately, the group that comes out to replace the Knights of Labor is the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. Now, the AFL, led by a guy named Samuel Gompers, cool name, here's what's the big difference in the AFL, is what it's called, the American Federation of Labor, as opposed to the Knights of Labor. I got you a little picture here. This is what the AFL wanted. They wanted 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, 8 hours of rest. Basically what people expect today, 40 hours a week. Now, what is really important to understand about the American Federation of Labor is they don't let just anybody in. They only let skilled workers in. Now, a skilled worker, the way to explain this is if you go to a job and they can train you how to do that job in a month or less, you're not a skilled worker. You're replaceable. All right. You're considered an unskilled worker. If it takes you years and years and years of independent practice outside somewhere before you come in to do that job somewhere else, you're a skilled worker. To simplify, we'll say welders. All right. There's a lot of metal work at the time. Welders were a skilled position. You had to know how to weld. Still is today. Very well paying skilled position today. All right. You have to go to school for it. You have to know how to do it. So a factory that has 2,000 workers in it, 10 of them might be skilled, we'll say welders, all right? They're 10 skilled welders. Well, if 10 unskilled workers are like, we're going to quit, and the factory's like, fine, all right? If those 10 skilled workers show up and say, we're going to quit, the factory panics because since they're skilled, they're not easily replaced. So the AFL caters to this skilled workers. This is a much smaller group, but it's a group that you can't live without. The AFL does a fantastic job for their skilled workers in getting them shorter work hours, higher pay, and things like that, because those skilled workers, man, they're hard to find. Yes, you have to pay them a whole bunch, but they're not replaceable. So the AFL focused almost exclusive, not almost, they did completely own the skilled workers. Well, you know who that's really bad for? Is the unskilled workers. See, the Knights of Labor, they had everybody, the skilled workers, unskilled workers, and they worked together for everybody. So who's left out to dry? Just the unskilled workers, and they don't have the skilled workers now in their union to like help them, get what they wanted. So the unskilled workers are going to create their union. So again, you have the Knights of Labor that went away. The AFL, the American Federation of Labor, is just for your skilled workers. The unskilled workers are going to create their union called the Industrial Workers of the World. They ain't here to play. The Industrial Workers of the World, when I say they have aggressive tactics, I don't mean they're throwing grenades in the police. Like that's not what I mean. But I'm saying it's one of those things that they're not real into compromise. They fully believe they know what they're worth, they know what their value is, and they expect to be treated that way. The reason the Industrial Workers of the World becomes so powerful, and it does become powerful, is they take men, women, children, black people. They take they take everybody in the Industrial Workers of the World from all different types of factories and any type of labor movement. So what the Industrial Workers of the World, and they even get the railroad workers involved, which is a huge industry. The Industrial Workers of the World have a massive population of people that join. All right. Here's some of their signs, like don't beg to work, demand to live. An injury to one is an injury to all, and I'm going to reference that here in a second. The I will win, one big union, and this is the Industrial Workers of the World, like tearing down these walls of low wages, long hours, rotten conditions, sped up system, like specialization, like work faster, work faster, work faster. Militarism. So that's what they're fighting against. This is the one I want to talk about. This is the big thing that terrifies the owners of the Industrial Workers of the World. Say there's a steel factory somewhere that's not doing what they're supposed to. So the Industrial Workers of the World has one leader, and it's this guy, Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs, if he feels like some of his members are being unfairly treated in a factory somewhere, he can go on strike, which means they refuse to work until their conditions are met and treated better. But he won't just go on strike at that factory. He can shut down every single factory across all industries in the entire country if he tells them to go on strike. So there's an issue happening over in Boston. Okay, whole country shut down. So there's a whole bunch of owners who are doing everything right, but if somebody somewhere else isn't, all their workers can go on strike. What this does is it forces the owners to put pressure on other owners to treat their workers better. Man, and so Eugene Debs, he's very popular among the workers. He actually runs for president 5 times as a socialist, and then even some of the communist ideas, but mainly as a socialist. Which is the idea that the federal government will control all parts of industry. He loses 5 times. He does have a lot of votes from his workers, but unless you were in the industrial workers of the world, he did seem kind of extreme based on what the vote output was at the time. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is this thing called the Sherman Antitrust Act. So here's a little cartoon of what it felt like in the Senate. So this is the senators, guys, that make the laws for the country. And these big guys here, these are supposed to be all the monopolies, like steel and copper, Standard Oil, Rockefeller. Like these are the big, into like coal. And they basically oversee the Senate to make sure everything goes right. Well, everybody knows that this is unfair. Like that trust and monopolies, which are interchangeable here, are not positive things in society. Congress does end up passing a law called the Sherman Antitrust Act. It says monopolies are illegal. They pass it, and I imagine these guys are really angry. The blowback from passing that is they never enforce it. These guys, even though there's a law saying monopolies can't exist, like you have to break up, you have to have competition in a free market economy, that it's never enforced. The big question is, all right, so we go tell Standard Oil, Rockefeller, he can't have this is a oil field. We tell Rockefeller, oh, you can't have that monopoly. Why? Did he win at being American? Seems like it. Where's our so even though they passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, it's going to be years. And when we get to Theodore Roosevelt, when he's finally like, you know what? We have that law in the books. We are going to enforce it. So somehow the Sherman Antitrust Act gets passed, even with the robber barons looking over at the Senate. But just because there's a law saying that monopolies can't exist, the fact that it is not enforced for like 20 years, and the monopolies just continue to do their thing, proves how much power those monopolies have. So even though there's been massive benefits and changes that have been made in the progressive era, there is still more things that have to be finished. And in the next unit, while we'll talk about different wars in Spanish American, we're going to talk about the final hammers and the final nails in the coffin for a lot of these monopolies in the next unit as well. All right, I'll see you guys later.